Please welcome back to Santa Barbara, John Lee Hancock. Thank you for being here, John.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's always lovely to come up. It's a gorgeous day outside. I appreciate you guys shunning the sunshine for a couple of hours.
So let's begin from the straight from the beginning. With this project, I know it's been in the works for almost 16 years, and I know you joined on 13 years ago. Can you talk a little bit what drew you to this project?
Sure. 13 years ago, I received a script from Casey Silver, our producer, to gauge my interest in directing it. And I read it, and I really liked it, and said I was interested, and so went and talked to Casey. And his involvement with it went back to John Fusco, and they were doing a movie, I believe it was called, I think it was Hidalgo, I'm not sure. And John had pitched to Casey this script and said yes, and so they set it up, and he wrote it, and I signed on, and the very first cast was Paul Newman and Robert Redford. That's how long ago. So one of the best days of my professional career was flying to Westport, Connecticut, and spending the day with Paul Newman and talking about life and this movie and Newman's own spaghetti sauce and everything in between.
So you do a beautiful job in the film where you're not showing Bonnie and Clyde all the way until the very climactic shootout at the end. Can you talk a little bit about how your framing and your colors, you really brought out like the beauty of them as a couple, and like the cars are slick and clean. Can you talk a little bit about that choice?
Yeah, thanks for observing that. That's very well put. The original script had them, I think John Fusco said, you'd never quite get the look at them you want. So they were in long shots and things like that. And I thought there might be a way to glamorize them even more and to approach that. If we were approaching the rest of the movie photographically in a naturalistic way, that I thought that, there was a way to make theirs more like a graphic novel. So John Schwartzman, our talented DP, and I started talking about ways to make frames really interesting, to make the colors really pop in terms of wardrobe and shoes and the perfect red nails on a hand, to try to build up a kind of a mythos around them for two reasons. One, I think to hopefully feel what people in 1934 were feeling, which is they're sexy and they're glamorous and the car's so clean and so fast and God, this is sexy. And then also, for people like myself who, saw the Penn film in '67, and I really liked that film, to build into that idea too, that I just know when we see him, it's going to be Warren and Faye. It's just so beautiful and everything. So that was on purpose. And then when they enter at the end, when they come to the ambush and they enter the naturalistic photography, we see that it's just everything about it is sad. It's just a couple of scrawny kids.
Now, the ambush scene is quite amazing, and I know from reading about it that you actually shot in the exact location that the actual ambush took place. Can you talk a little bit about the choice of actually putting it in that and recreating that exact scene? Sure.
The very first stop when we started location scouting was in Louisiana, and said, let's go look at the ambush site, because we knew we were going to have to replicate it by choosing another location. And I'd read so much about it, about how you could hear the V8 engine before you saw it, and it came around the bend, and then it's coming, and it's got to come a couple of miles towards you before it lands. And the road was kind of undulating and going up and down, so you would see the car and then not see it. And thinking about the anticipation for the posse in terms of this is it, and waiting and waiting and waiting, when you got to that road, you saw it, and it's still a very rural road, although the pavement's different. It has yellow stripes. It's got some transformers, and there are shoulders on the road now, whereas 34, the shoulders were very small. There was more vegetation. So we started looking at locations and couldn't find anything. Every place was kind of lacking one of the elements I was looking for. And, I guess it's what makes a good producer. Casey Silver said, why don't we just shoot it there? And said, well, if we can, that'd be great. So they let us block off the road for, a week or so, and we did our movie magic to return the road to 1934 standards. And it was really a good choice, not just visually, but it was eerie. And I think it helped the actors too. They were nervous. I mean, I remember Thomas Mann holding that gun and his hands were shaking. And, and he's not actually going to be shooting and killing anyone. It's just he was amped up for it. And it made them feel like the posse must have felt, which is, it's going to end here. It's going to be awful. It's going to be fast. And I'm going to empty my gun.
Now, the cast as an ensemble is amazing. You have Woody Harrelson, Kevin Costner, Kathy Bates. Can you tell us a little bit on how they ended up getting involved in the project?
Sure. I gave the script to Kevin about 10 years ago, and he read it and really liked it, but said, I'm too young to play this. And he's right. I mean, and he aged into it nicely. Woody, about 6 years ago, read it and said, in true Woody fashion, said, yeah, I love it. I'm in. Just let me know when. I said, okay, great. I'll let you know. I didn't know it was going to be 6 years, but when I called, he goes, you didn't forget me. And it's like, yeah. And Kathy, I told Kathy about it when we did The Blind Side together. And I said, I've got a role for you. And she goes and told her about Ma Ferguson, and she was fascinated. And then the first news of this, when it hit that we were making the movie, Kathy called and said, how's my role? I said, it's still there. I'll give you a call.
Now, Frank and Manny are like an old married couple, and you shine it through so well to show their relationship without having to cut to flashbacks and showing what they were like in the past. You show that they've been together for a long time. Can you talk a little bit about working that dynamic?
Yeah, I think one of the early drafts of the script had some certain flashbacks to them in their early Ranger days on horseback and stuff, but I kind of felt like that wasn't necessary, and hopefully that Kevin and Woody would walk in and you would feel the mileage between them. And then of course there are a couple of stories in the movie where they talk about their past and being Rangers, but these were guys kind of born 100 years too late. They'd spent most of their career on horseback and tracking in that way. I don't know. I just thought they would be so good together, and I think they are so good together, because there's that shared experience of a lot of stuff that's tough. I mean, it's the toll it takes on their souls too. It's not just we're the good guys, we kill the bad guys. It's like, we have a terrible gift, and we know how this ends, and it ends with us not sleeping so that everybody else can sleep.
Now, can you? There's two parts in the film that are, and you kind of brought them up. When Frank confronts Clyde's dad, that is a very powerful moment in the grocery store. Can you talk a little bit about shooting that scene and to get that emotion out from Kevin?
Sure. I mean, it's always been kind of a pivotal scene. I mean, if this were a movie we all know how this ends. I mean, we know the story of Bonnie and Clyde, so it's not a will they catch them or not that we already know. So to me, the movie was very much about the journey of these two men, which it makes it kind of, some people might look and go, in the second half of the movie, we stop everything for two different, 5-minute scenes where people are explaining their past. But I think it's in keeping with what the story I wanted to tell. But for that particular scene, John Fusco told me that there was an actual conversation between Henry Barrow and Frank Hamer that happened in Arcadia in the aftermath of the ambush. And it was Henry Barrow saying, I don't blame you. You did what you had to do. My family's at a better place now that this is over. And so John, like any really good screenwriter, took that and said, where does that work in the most dramatic way? And placed it back into the script. The first order of business was casting Henry Barrow, and it's a long scene and an important scene, and he's not in a lot of the rest of the movie. And William Sadler has always been a favorite character actor of mine ever since Shawshank and a million other movies, and Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, and just a lovely man too. So he signed on, and he brought, I mean, the most surprising thing to me in that scene, and when I read the script, was you don't see that coming. That he says, you're not hearing me, mister. Would you end this now for my family, damn it? And you go, oh, there's a lot of pain all over the place in this. And I think it's surprising to Frank Hamer, too. So that's why I like the scene a lot, too.
And then there's another scene that really strikes out when Frank attacks the gas station clerk, because he brings up a really poignant point about this, what about the victims? You're thinking about Bonnie and Clyde, and you're putting them up on a pedestal. What about the victims? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think it's a scene that was intended to both establish what the common man was thinking about Bonnie and Clyde in Depression-era Texas, which is the banks aren't the good guys. They're taking our farms, our houses, our businesses. They're the bad guys, and we're the little guys, and we have no way to lash out. And here come these two people who are little guys like us, and they're lashing out, so I'm behind them. So I think from the perspective of the gas station attendant, that's what he's providing in terms of story. But from Frank's standpoint, I wanted it to be, I think the reason Frank Hamer took this job was he didn't need the money. He did not. I think it galled him. I think it galled him that there were people out there killing people and becoming famous for something they should be ashamed of. And I think that's why he took the job. So it exposes that, and I think it also is intended to show that Frank's becoming a little unhinged about this too, because there's no way you should beat up some poor gas station attendant, for information. That's not right. And I think Manny recognizes that he pulls his gun out and sticks it in the guy's face. Frank's becoming unhinged. He's so galled that this has become a different enterprise for him after Grapevine, especially. So those are my intentions in terms of that scene.
Now, some people may see Frank and Manny as also being, they have their own baggage. They've also done some bad things in their life, just like Bonnie and Clyde, but they're the law, so the law's on their side. So do you have to see them as something different? Or can you put them in the same category as Bonnie and Clyde, because they're all killers at one point?
Yeah, I don't think I'd put them exactly in the same, but I think they did have the law behind them. That said, I think when you talk about South Texas during the era when they were working, it was an all bets are off proposition. Frank Hamer was an amazing guy in terms of the stories. You could make 10 movies about Frank Hamer. He going into small towns in East Texas, he saved 16 African Americans from lynchings. He's kind of the motto it used to be one riot, one ranger. Like it only takes one ranger to quell a riot. And that was because of Frank Hamer. He would come in and say, no, this ain't happening. And he would stand at the courthouse with his gun and say, next person who puts a foot there is going to get a bullet in it. And a guy did, and he shot him in the foot. And everybody backed up. So there's that. There's also South Texas, which is, a border that was fluid, and there was lots of bad stuff happening down there. And, I think Manny Galt, if these two men are kind of one person, then Manny Galt is the conscience, and he's the one who wears all that on his sleeve. Frank is stoic and pretends that none of it really matters. He pushes it down like some people deserve to die. That's what it is. They're bad people. He doesn't really feel that, and that exposes itself, hopefully, by the end of the movie, that he's thought about this too, and he's going to give them a chance to surrender.
Now, the cars in this film and the set and everything, can you talk a little bit about how you ended up with the classic cars and the set themselves?
Yeah. First, my production designer, Michael Kornblith, who I've worked with several times, and DP John Schwartzman and Daniel Orlandi Costumes, we've worked together several times. We started a conversation very early around all this because you all have to work in concert, especially with a period movie. And under the heading of production design is, Michael Kornblith reaching out and finding your transportation person, the person that's going to help find these cars. Which ones do we buy? Which ones do we have to replace engines in? Which ones do we have to redo the transmission? And then on a budget like we had, you can't just buy all the cars you need. You're going to have a lot of cars that are either donated or you've got car clubs. And we did this for the founder in Georgia as well. You've got car clubs of people that love their old cars and love to have them in movies. They'll go to a mall somewhere and park it and talk about it for 8 hours with other car collector people. And unfortunately, sometimes they've souped up their car and put rims on it that aren't period or whatever. So you're looking for the real traditionalist in this. And then, you pay them some money and you dress them you go and you can drive your car. You dress them in period stuff, and then they are in the background in Dallas, Texas, driving around in a circle over and over, and they're very happy to do it.
And now, The last part of the film, when you're driving the bodies through town and people are ripping at it, you kind of dressed it down than what actually originally happened. Can you talk a little bit about the gruesomeness of the people needing bits and pieces of Bonnie?
Yeah, I mean, it was always, I mean, it's historically known what happened, but it had never really been portrayed before, I don't think. Even though there have been many Bonnie and Clyde movies. But as violent and as grotesque as the ambush is, and as over the top, to be completely honest, as it is, it's as promised. Frank Early says, we know how the road ends, and it's bloody, and it's awful, and we lose sleep over these kinds of things. We know exactly how this ends. And, the horrible feeling of carrying that around with you. The one thing that's not promised but is absolutely true is what happened in Arcadia, because after the ambush, Frank Hamer just said, well, we've got a ton of evidence in this car. We've got 3,000 rounds of, armor-plated bullets or whatever. We've got all these machine guns. We've got 2 dead bodies with lots of holes in them. Let's not do it here. We need to get these bodies to a mortuary. So he drove into Gippsland, called a tow truck, and back then it was all party lines, so people would hear everything, and they would call their neighbors or race down to their neighbors or get on their horse or car or whatever and tell them they killed Bonnie and Clyde and they're taking them to Arcadia. And so a tow truck came, they closed the doors, and they towed them to Arcadia, which was, an hour, 45 minutes away. And by the time they arrived in Arcadia, the population of Arcadia, I'll probably get the numbers wrong, had gone from 4,000 to 12,000 or something. So we didn't have nearly that many people in our scene, but in reality, they tried to cut off Clyde's trigger finger, his ear. They cut parts of Bonnie's hair. They dabbed blood, as we show. They stole every piece of the car they could, all while it was moving through town. They took it to Gippsland because Conger's Furniture Store, in that part of the South, a lot of times furniture stores were in the front and mortuaries in the back. So Conger's was a furniture store up front and a mortuary in the back, which gives new meaning to the term layaway, I suppose. But so it was factual, and the request of Frank for an exclusive interview that he turned down is also factual. So somebody asked me, it's like, you've got a movie that's a period movie and it's about 2 old white guys, and how is this not toxic masculinity? And I said, in some ways it is. I mean, I understand that point. However, I said there's some of this which is men with a code. And I think, in today's times, we come across fewer of those men with a code. And I think that the code that makes someone go, I don't need your $1,000 because I think it's unseemly to benefit financially, emotionally, or otherwise off someone else's grief and blood. And today, that happens every instant of every day. So, I mean, yeah, the old code is, you could say it's toxic masculinity if you want, or you can also say there were some good things about it that are honorable.
Now, can you tell us a little bit about how filming went for the car chase scene? Because that's a very intense scene where you're putting it out in the dirt in those nice cars and you're just twirling them around. Can you talk a little bit about shooting that?
Yeah, it was originally scripted as a chase that ended when Clyde got over a railroad track just before a train came and they couldn't get past. And I always felt like I'd seen that about 50 times, including in Roadrunner cartoons and stuff. So we have to find a different way to do it. Plus, nobody wants to shoot on a railroad track, and you have to find a track that's not being used and all the safety stuff. And it's like, why even go down that road? So I dreamed up something that is it's not real on several fronts. One, there are several reports of Frank almost coming across Bonnie and Clyde through the Midwest, missing them by 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there. So as far as we know, there was never an actual chase. So I said, well, what if we use the dust and all that stuff to kind of make it more difficult for them to see each other? And it's the only real piece of kind of magical realism, if you will, in the movie, because they just kind of disappear. You could say practically, well, there was so much dust that they made it to those trees in the back somewhere or something. Or you can say maybe Clyde can't be caught. And I was okay with that, but I have to say I was worried. And then when we said, let's just make it tons of dust. And so we got many, many acres up in northern Louisiana. The trees in the background of that are actually Arkansas. And just dried it out, laid out lots of dirt, and then just had them, race around.
Well, it's a beautiful scene for the fact that I think it adds to them being ghosts and Clyde being a ghost because they vanish, and that's when you know they truly are chasing a ghost. So well done. Can you talk a little bit about? I know we went into location and everything of the real thing, but can you talk a little bit about shooting in Texas and Louisiana and all the far camera shots of on the road? It's basically a road journey. It's a road movie.
Yeah, I mean, and part of that goes to the shooting in the aspect ratio of 2:3:9, where the geography is very much a character in the movie. It's called The Highwaymen, and it's a road movie. They're on a journey. So you want to get the wide open spaces and also give the idea that, that there weren't as many roads back then, and there weren't as many gas stations back then, and that's how Clyde was able to evade everyone, because he would drive 450 miles a day at 85 miles an hour. He was a great driver, and he hardly ever stopped. Everybody else would sleep, and he would keep going. And how Hamer tracked him was really old school. It was like, okay, 11 gallons go into a Ford V8. How fast is he driving? How many miles can he go? Okay, now I'm going to draw a circle. Now, which direction do I think he went? Where's the nearest gas station to go check? And we went old school on it. So, but that's a field of your question. But the thing is that we shot in Louisiana. It's more of a Texas story than anything, but we shot in Louisiana. The short answer is just because of money. You get 35 cents back on the dollar there. And on a movie at our budget, it makes a big difference what you can put on screen. That said, I always knew that Texas needed to be a character. And I had worked on a ranch in Archer City, Texas, every summer growing up. And so I said, I need to have second unit out there, and I also need to have at least a day or two with our actors so we can see them in that world. And so we got, Netflix said, yes, you can do that. And so I said, start looking around North Texas, around Wichita Falls, and Archer City, and Throckmorton, and Olney, and Graham, and all these little towns. And so all those wide open spaces are in that area.
Now, did Frank and Manny, the families, have any say in the film itself?
Well, yes and no. I mean, when John Fusco first pitched the idea of doing a Frank Hamer movie, he said, I won't do it unless I can get Frank Hamer Jr. to give me his blessing, because Frank Hamer Jr. was still alive. So he sought out Frank Hamer Jr., who was not really a fan of Hollywood after the way, his dad was turned into a buffoon in Penn's movie. But John worked it and finally met with him in Austin, Texas, and he gave him his blessing. So there's that part of it. And then Frank Jr. has died in the years. He's been dead 5 years now, I guess. But there were other family members. And so we wanted to make sure that when we completed the movie that we had screenings for the other family members so they can see it before. And it's selfishly, there's a couple of reasons. One, you want their blessing because, everybody's out with sharp knives and they'll find somebody who goes, it's not right or whatever. I was his third distant cousin's son, and that's not what I heard, So we got them all together in Austin, Dallas, and Denver, and did screenings for them, and they were all very pleased.
Wonderful. Now, can you talk a little bit? It would be wrong of me not to mention the score of the film. It's such a beautiful score, keeping up with the twangy sound of the South. Can you talk a little bit about the composing of the score?
Sure. I've worked with Thomas Newman before on Saving Mr. Banks, and he has, 17 Academy Award nominations for a very good reason. He's quite good. And a nicer gentleman you will never meet. He is fantastic. So when he's so busy, but his schedule opened up for this, thankfully. And we started talking about it. And the nice thing about him is that he approaches it from character first. And he said, who wants what in this scene? which character am I playing musically in this scene? And we would have these great discussions. And I'm not a musician. I appreciate it. I'm not a musician in any way. So it's maybe the most fun part of the process for me, because my notes are very much, I can't act either, but I can give notes to an actor, and I can give notes to a composer too. And it's not, should we add a cello here? It's like, it's really sad, should it be bittersweet? And he'll go, I know how to do that. And there it is, But yeah, it's great, and he's just a wonderful guy, and it's always so much fun. So I think it's a beautiful score too.
Now, there's another scene that I want to talk about on Woody Harrelson's character, the poker scene, when he's telling the story of his past. Can you talk a little bit about, did you let Woody take on that and just go with it, or was he's like telling the story to himself more than he is to the people around him?
That's a good point. The thing is, when you've got thoroughbreds like Woody and Kevin and Kathy Bates and John Carroll Lynch and Kim Dickens and Thomas Mann and on, part of it is not getting in their way. I think the most important thing for me is I don't rehearse a bunch, but I talk a lot. I mean, I like to sit with the actors in preparation and talk about what this scene's about, kind of, without talking about, no, do this differently. And with Woody, that morning, because it's a long time, it's a long story, and you've got lots of angles, and he's going to be retelling it over and over and over. But when we turned to him, I said, forget about everybody else at the poker table. You're telling this for the benefit of yourself and Frank, who's out the window. So it is kind of to himself. It's, and he grabbed onto that and just got lost in it.
It's a beautiful scene. It's very touching for him how he portrayed what had happened in their past.
Yeah, and that's an amalgam of several things that happen. I mean, it's partly true and not partly true, and something from something else and whatever. But I felt like dramatically it told you that these are wounded men, and they carry a lot of scars, and they're not super righteous do-gooders. They are men with a terrible gift.
Yeah. And it all comes together nicely with them as their relationship when the scene where they stop the car and they get out and they switch seats. They've come to grasp with each other at that moment that, hey, we did it. This is the end of the road trip.
Yeah, Woody finally gets to drive.
He really wanted to drive. A final question for you. I have to know, is the pig, was that a real thing?
The de Javelina hog was a real hog named Porky that he had and that Gladys hated. But it was a gift from a widow in Alpine for some reason, and during his time down in the Big Bend. And the hog took to him and wouldn't leave his side. And, the hog was by his side, I think, when his son died at Iwo Jima, and he got the letter. He was petting the hog.
That's amazing. Well, John, thank you so much for being here. Thank you all for staying.
Thank you.